Okay, fantastic, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience. It is now officially 6:05, so I'm going to get started with the presentation. And as and when our latecomers join, they can obviously catch up. As always, we are going to be recording this event, and we will be sharing it on the My Property app page as well as on the Sapin member page. So make sure to go and check those out if you do want to catch up or if you want to just review what we've gone through. Just before I get started, I want to double check that everybody can see my screen with the slides understanding and negotiating with people. So if you can just pop a yes in the chat bar. Okay, fantastic. I'm assuming based on Dave's feedback that you guys can see my screen. Um, so let's go with it. Understanding and negotiating people. Now, what I thought would be useful in this webinar is to go into a little bit of detail of understanding the different personality types and different wealth dynamics that there are, and then to take you through 6 persuasion techniques. Now, these are techniques that you can use in any kind of negotiation, whether it's a negotiation with your kids, with your spouse, or with potentially a tough estate agent, a distressed seller, or a savvy investor. So the content I'm going to take you through now is rather generic. I wanted to keep it quite broad so that you can apply it to different situations. Now, let's first start with self-awareness. And I think this is the key to communicating effectively and negotiating is first understanding yourself in a little bit more detail, understanding that you are a unique individual and the people that you're working with are also unique individuals. And once you can understand the complexities of different people, you'll be a much more effective communicator going forward. So, where I thought we could start is on a concept called wealth dynamics. And essentially, wealth dynamics is based on the concept that value follows money, money follows value. For instance, if you can get a really good degree and you can add a lot of value, let's say like a doctor, so you can study really hard, add a lot of value through your practice, you will be paid well. If you can get really good at any kind of skill and you can add a lot of value to someone, you will get paid a lot. This is something that Tony Robbins often refers to, is that the only way to become truly wealthy is to add more value to people. Because once you're adding value, people will want to pay you for the work that you're doing. So I had a little bit of a look at different frameworks that be applicable to understanding what your value is that you can add in order to become wealthy. And I came across a concept called wealth dynamics. If you haven't heard of it before, go do some research on it. It is a very interesting concept. So let's start with wealth dynamics. And essentially, this framework will tell you what your ability is to add a lot of value. Because some of us are more systems driven and can create systems that will enable or empower a lot of people, and we can get paid for that. Some of us are really good at speaking and selling and being on stage, so we can get paid for that. And some of us are really good at timing the market. What this framework does is it teaches you or shows you what your natural state of flow would be and what your natural state of adding value would be. So, how the model is working is essentially you've got a top and a bottom line. This is known as your thinking dynamic. Now, your thinking dynamic composes of 2 areas. You've got people on the top. People who are on the top part of the thinking dynamic are very intuitive. These are people who are big picture thinkers. Guys who like to start new businesses, who come up with crazy and new inventions. That's the value that they bring. Essentially, innovation. That's what these people are incredibly good at. At the bottom of the thinking dynamic, you've got people who are very sensory focused. Sensory being data focused. So they are very good at looking at very specific data, and then timing is the value that they bring. Now, on the left and the right, you've also got what we call the action dynamic. So top and bottom are your thinking dynamic, left and right is your action dynamic. This is really where you've got your introverts on the left. What introverts are very good at is simplifying and multiplying. On the right, you've got your extroverts. These are people who are good at magnifying or creating exposure around a concept. Now, when you combine these two, the thinking dynamic As well as the action dynamic, you get 8 different wealth profiles. Now, as I mentioned, each one of us has a different way in which we can add value to people. And when you're able to determine what your value add is, what your natural, gift is that you can bring to people, and you focus on that, you can generate an incredible amount of wealth. So, if we look at the first one, top in the middle, these are people known as the creators. These are ideas persons, people who can come up with great concepts, great new inventions, innovations. A classic example of someone who sits at this level would be a Richard Branson. See, Richard Branson doesn't run any of his businesses, but what he does is he sees the market and he creates businesses, he creates products, he starts a business and then he gives it to somebody else to run. That's why he's created the wealth that he's created. It's not because he's focusing on running his businesses, because that's not where his natural value comes from. He's an ideas person. He wants to be thinking outside the box. He wants to be innovating. And that's why he's created that. And this also, funny enough, is where I sit. And I guess the time I'm happiest is when I'm building the My Property app, when I'm creating new features or creating new elements of the app or thinking about how the proposal can be enhanced. I love imagining, creating, visualizing. So when I spend more of my time there, not only am I adding a lot of value to people, but I also feel good. And thus, I want to do it more. And I get into what we call the flow state more often and more regularly, which again allows me to continually add more and more value and thus generate wealth. If we go now to the next stage, which is the star, this is someone who's known as the front person, the salesperson, someone who doesn't bring the spark, but brings the sparkle. The spark is started with the creator. They create a spark, they create an innovation. The star is the person who can take that innovation and bring it to the market and excite people and bring them up and sell a product. Remember, they can magnify. So they magnify whatever the product's features are and they can thus sell it very well. A great example of a star is Oprah Winfrey. She's in front of millions of people on a regular basis, and although she doesn't create necessarily her own products, she's very good at displaying other people's products and using her authority to influence people to buy that product or to show some sort of interest. That's what the star is very good at: being in stage, being in front of people, selling ideas. That's where they need to be. If we look at the next person, they're known as the supporter, and the value they bring and truly what they're focused on is supporting, uplifting, and encouraging teamwork. So this is the kind of person who can really enable somebody else's business to grow. The best example I have for you is Andrew Walker. Now, if you haven't met Andrew in person, then this might be a little bit hard to relate to. But essentially, Andrew started a networking platform called the South African Property Investors Network. And what this network and this platform does is it connects people with deals, with money, with skills. It's basically a networking event where anyone interested in property can come, learn, share, grow, and move their business forward. Now, when he started the business, it was 7 people that attended his first event. A couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. DeMartini here, and we had over 200 people attend the event. What Andrew can do is he can support other people's businesses like no one else I've ever seen. He can make one phone call to somebody he knows in APSA, and he can completely turn your business around. That's the kind of influence he has. And the reason why he's generated wealth is because he's focused on supporting and enabling others, and that's where his wealth comes from. If we look now at the bottom right, now we're starting to go from the intuitive level, which is at the top, down towards the century, the timing level. On the bottom right, we've got the deal maker. Now, the deal maker is focused on win-win scenarios. They can find a distressed seller and a hungry buyer, put the deal together, and thus generate a lot of cash flow or a lot of profit from the deal. The best guy that I know in this industry is Lebo Gunguluza. He is a Dragon's Den investor. And essentially, what he's really good at is seeing a product or an innovation in the prop tech space, finding an investor, usually an overseas investor, and bringing the two together, thus making a deal. They are good at making win-win situations. If we go all the way to the bottom, this is known as the trader. What they specialize in is timing the market. They know when to buy and when to sell in order to make a margin off that deal. The best example that I have here for you today is Patrice Motsepe. Now, if you don't know Patrice, he's a very successful billionaire and mining magnate in South Africa. And what he did is in 1997, when the gold price was really low, he bought 6 mines. Um, I think at the price of about 7.5 or 7.7 million, which at that time was an absolute steal. And that's how he started his company, African Rainbow Minerals. So he was able to time the market, be in the right place at the right time, timed the market, and thus started his very successful career in the mining sector. So that is the skill or the value they bring. If we go to the bottom left, here we're now starting to see the introverts come into play. The first one we have is the accumulator. This is the kind of person who is focused on long-term assets. Somebody who loves to read, loves to accumulate knowledge, assets, networks. Somebody who will take their time. They're not necessarily rushed or hasty to make a decision. They'll make a slow but very, very well calculated decision. The best example of an accumulator is Warren Buffett. You know, he doesn't speed into any decision. He takes an enormous amount of time before investing in a business. And I heard that he reads up to 5, 6 hours a day on different businesses and different areas that he's interested in. That's the kind of accumulator mindset, accumulating knowledge as well as assets. If we go to the left hand side here now to the Lord, this is the most probably the most introverted and the most unpeople person there is, if that's a word. And the Lord is focused on one thing, and that is cash flow. They only want to know where the cash flow is in the deal. So they get the concept from landlord. So the landlord, the person who owns the property, doesn't really care if the bank owns it or if an investor owns it. As long as they're getting the cash flow, they're happy. That is what this person's focused on. And the best example I could think of is a guy by the name of Sergey Brin. He's one of the founders of Google. So the one founder, Larry Page, he's the part of Google that comes up with the innovation. They come up with making sure the customer experience is exquisite. He's focused on how does the customer experience Google. Where Sergey Brin, who's on the screen there, he's focused on only how is Google going to make money. So he's worried about how does every transaction relate to a sale? How does every Google ad get exposure? Or how do they make money off every single flow of transaction in the business? That's why they're a great team, because Larry Page is all about customer experience. Sergey Brin is all about cash flow. How do we make money off of this? And then your final wealth profile is known as the mechanic. Now, the mechanic is very good at creating systems, procedures, processes, somebody who's very focused on automating and optimizing your business. So as the creator is very good at starting a project, the mechanic is very good at finalizing and maintaining a project. They aren't necessarily the kind of people who are innovative in creating their own projects, but they can take somebody else's project and automate and systemize that project much more effectively than any other profile. An example of this is Jack Ma. This is the guy who started Alibaba, which is one of the most successful dropshipping companies in the world. And the reason why it's such a success is because he systemized and automated so much of this procedure that it was able to take off. So I'm hoping that, and maybe you need to expose yourself to this framework a little bit more to understand where you sit. But once you can understand where your natural flow is, where your value add is, a couple of things will happen. One, you will add a lot more value because it's something you naturally enjoy. Number two, you're going to get energy from doing it as opposed to exposing or depleting your energy. As a creator, if I'm focusing too much of my time on, potentially systems, I would get bored and I would lose my flow because I don't like the maintenance of a business. And if every time I'm focusing on maintenance and admin, I get bored, I get tired, and I need to recover. Whereas if I'm focusing on creations, if I'm focusing on innovations, if I'm focusing on sharing my ideas with people, I get an enormous amount of energy. And I can keep going and I can sustain that level of productivity and output for a lot longer. So understanding where you sit on this profile will tell you where you need to unlock the value in other people, but also where your energy is going to come from so that you can sustain it. And I'm sure a lot of you on the call tonight were at the Dr. DeMartini conference that we had a couple of weeks ago. The one thing that stood out for me in terms of his talk was that people get get sidetracked by secondary activities. He says that people are struggling to make money because they get distracted by secondary activities. They focus on admin, they focus on things that don't inspire or excite them, and they end up depleting all their energy trying to maintain the business instead of focusing on the energy and on the areas that are going to give them that excitement. So Dr. DeMartini, he works 360 days of the year. He only takes Christmas off. And he says he never gets tired because all he does is he focuses on teaching and learning. That's it. Everything else he outsources. Now, I do understand that a lot of you on the call don't have potentially the resources to outsource all of your activities, but a virtual PA, someone that you can get from India who works at 100 Rand an hour, can potentially offload some of your administrative tasks so that you can focus on the stuff that really excites and uplifts you. So that's just a bit of a thought. This is part of the self-awareness, understanding where your value comes from so that you can focus more time and effort into that, thus growing your confidence and thus growing the value you add to other people. Now let's talk about the art of persuasion. And I call it an art because it is something that I don't know if there's necessarily a science behind it. There's not a guaranteed way in persuading or influencing or inspiring someone. There are certain techniques so that you can use that will enhance your ability to persuade. So I've got essentially six key persuasion techniques for you tonight, and then I'll take some questions and then we're out. So let's jump in to the first one. The first persuasion technique is known as scarcity. Scarcity. So the rule is that the perceived value is higher when something is limited. So the perceived value of, let's say, a shoe, for example, goes up in value if there are a limited number of shoes available. An example that I can give you is that there was a recent FlySafe Air 5 Rand a flight sale going on, but there were limited seats available. I think it was the first, I can't remember now, 5 or 10,000 people that booked the ticket would get it at 5 Rand. Now, I remember myself, I was on the website on FlySafe for about 2-3 hours trying to get in. My friend Dave, he was also online for a couple of hours. We had probably about 7 or 8 of our friends all online almost the whole day trying to access this amazing product. And because it was limited, we felt that there was even a higher perceived value. So yes, 5 Rand a ticket is obviously huge value, but the fact that it was limited is what got everybody onto the website on that day. So limiting your offer, so to speak, will increase the value. So if we use a property example, the way I would maybe approach an estate agent is say, I've got investors with 1 million Rand and they're going to invest in the first deal that gets accepted. Now, what I've just done there is I've created a little bit of scarcity with the estate agent to say, I do have the cash available, but you need to push my offer through quickly. Otherwise, my 1 million Rand is going to go to the next estate agent. So that's a small or simple technique that you can use to increase the value, the perceived value of your offer using the technique known as scarcity. Reciprocity. This is another very interesting technique. So the rule is that people tend to give more when they first receive. People tend to give more when they receive. So an example, there was a very interesting study done in a restaurant chain in America. Essentially what they wanted to do was to see, is there, do clients pay a higher tip when they receive a mint? So what they did is they first had a day where they gave no mints to the clients and they got sort of a baseline of how much the tip was. The next day they gave each client 1 mint and the increase in the tip ratio was 3%. The following day they gave each client 2 mints and thus the tip ratio went up from 3% to 14%. And then on the final day what they did is they gave each client 1 mint. And then the waiter would walk away and then come back to the table and say, actually, for you kind people, you guys get 1 more mint each. And that is where they got the maximum increase in their tip ratio, which was 21%. Now, what that basically says is that people tend to give more when they receive first, but also it's the way in which you do it. The only difference between the 14% and the 21% is that the waiter came back and said, because you were such a great, table or such great people, here's an extra mint, and that's why they received a bigger tip. So that's an example of the social proof or the social psychology that is behind this technique. A property example. One of the most important ways in which I can get a deal across the line with an estate agent is to show them a proof of funds. So before I ask them or expect them to go and fight for my offer to be accepted by the owner, I'll first give them either my bank statement that shows that I have the money to do the deal, or I give them some sort of bank guaranteed check. The reality is that estate agents have so many offers that they are fighting for and trying to push people through. And then when it gets to successful OTP signing, the bank says no, or the person can't produce the funds. And I know that the estate agents get very, very frustrated with that. So if you first give the proof of funds, you've given something to them, there's more likely that they will reciprocate and try and fight harder for your offer to go through. So that's an example of reciprocity. Social proof. This is a very good one. People are herd animals and they follow the herd mentality. So if everybody else is doing it, there's a better chance that I would do it. So an example, I used here the pickup community. Now, the pickup community is a group of people who focus on techniques and strategies to pick up and seduce women, which is obviously not something that I agree with, but I guess there are people out there that are looking for some skills and some confidence to be able to seduce women. And one of the key techniques that these pickup artists do is that they always arrive at a club or a nightclub or some sort of social scene, and they'll come with two girls, one on either arm. And the reason why they walk into a club with these girls on their arm is because they are creating social proof. They are creating this image of being an alpha male. When they walk into a club and there's two girls on either arm and another girl sees them, that girl sees that he's been already accepted by two females, and he's got almost that social proof, that alpha male status, so that when he does eventually approach this girl, she kind of already trusts him because she's seen him with two other girls. So that's an example of how social proof works in order to persuade someone. In a property example, the best way to get an investor on board with your deal is to show them a previous deal that you've done. So if you've got a business case of a previous deal in your investor proposal, your chances of getting an investor to buy in go up, 10 times. I do a lot of speaking at different events, at Legacy and at the South African Property Investors Network, and I'm constantly speaking on stage in front of hundreds of people, which gives the illusion to those people in the room that I've got a lot of property experience. So after a lot of my events, I get people coming up to me and saying, I've got this deal, I've got this skill, I've got this money, and I want to invest because of that social proof. So social proof is such an incredibly important element that you need to tap into when trying to raise money from private investors. Liking. People do business with people they like. You need trust, you need you need rapport in order to do a deal with someone. So if we use an example, there was a university in America as well that did a quick social psychology assessment. What they did is they took a group of 100 students. Half of the students they put into one category, let's call that category A, and then the other half they put into category B. In category A, they asked them to do an online negotiation with another student, and the only requirement for these people was they have to get down to business as soon as possible. That was their objective. So no small talk, just get into the deal as quickly as possible and see if you can come to an agreement negotiating on specific terms. They also said to category B that they'd be doing an online interview or online negotiation, but the objective was slightly different. They said to them, spend the first 5 minutes of the conversation just getting to know each other, finding some sort of common ground, and then negotiate on these terms. And essentially what happened is category A or group A, who were told business first, just do the business, came to an agreement 55% of the time. Whereas the second group, who were told to spend 5 minutes getting to know each other, got to a successful negotiation 90% of the time. Essentially, what that's saying is that if you spend a little bit of time just building a relationship, building some rapport, and finding common ground with an estate agent, a builder, and an investor, you've got a better chance of influencing and getting them onto your team. So probably the best way that I've found my deals these days is spending time building a relationship with the estate agent. My most recent deal, I got through an estate agent who I've known for about 12 months, and my partner in the deal who brought half of the capital, I've known him for 2 years. So it's not an easy process. It takes a long time to build enough rapport and trust with someone to actually do business with them. So that's why attending these networking events are so important, because you get exposed to a lot of people who are interested in property, get their numbers, meet for coffee, meet for lunch, keep in contact over WhatsApp, over email, send them all the deals, all the opportunities that you have. And eventually, as time goes on, once the trust is there, you're likely to do business with them. The next one is authority. Authority. And the rule here is simple. People listen to qualified people. People tend to follow, trust, and are influenced quite easily by people who are qualified. For example, what's more impressive, going to Miss Susan for health advice or Dr. Susan for for health advice? They also did a very interesting study. I think it was in the Netherlands, around the difference in clients listening and taking advice from a doctor who had their diploma on the wall versus a doctor who didn't have their diploma on the wall. And it's something around 70% of the people who went to a doctor with a diploma on the wall actually took their advice, versus about 40% of the people who went to a doctor without the diploma on the wall. So I think we all understand this. Authority is very important. When someone sounds like the expert, you tend to listen and be influenced by them a lot more. Property example, the quickest way for me to determine if an estate agent is worth working with or not is to tell them that I've done a limestone review, I've looked at the report, and this is what I think the value of the property is. Immediately they can tell that I'm not a first-time buyer, that I'm a serious investor. Usually they ask me if I'm an estate agent myself, because it's almost only estate agents that use limestone. But very quickly I can tell them, guys, I'm a serious investor. I'm looking for good below market value deals. I use Lightstone and TPN to do my area research, so I'm going to know what the value of the property is, and I'm going to come in 30% below market value. A lot of estate agents put the phone down on my ear. They're not interested in working with me, which is fine, because I want to weed out those who are serious versus those who aren't serious. So the authority play here for me is a very interesting technique to be able to find out who's your serious estate agents, who are the estate agents that have worked with investors before and are willing to work with them again, versus who are looking for first-time buyers and thus not really worth working with. So that's the authority play. The last one is consistency. And the rule here is that people want to be consistent in words and actions. People want to be consistent in the words and actions they've done in the past. So an example, this is known as the insurance salesman tactic. So what the insurance salesmen used to do is they used to come, knock door to door on different people's houses. They'd come into the living room and they'd ask a series of about 50 questions. And each question was very cleverly directed to getting the person to say yes. So they would say something, they would have a question like, is your name, and they'd obviously have done their research and know that their name is Lawrence Bull. So they say, is your name Lawrence Bull? And the person would say, yes. Do you live here? Yes. Is this your phone number? Yes. Is this your email address? Yes. Is this your favorite couch? Yes. Is this constantly asking questions, and every question was very cleverly ensuring that the person would say yes. Now the reason why they did this is because they would get a client to say yes 50 times in a row, and then their 51st question would be, do you want us to become your insurer? And the person was so used to and in that consistency of saying yes that they said yes most of the time. So it was a very clever tactic. If I use another example, in the speaking world, when in the seminar speaking world, what you'll notice is that the seminar speakers will often ask you questions like, raise your hand if this makes sense. Do you agree? Would you do this deal? Getting you to constantly answer these questions that would be in terms of a yes. And they try and anchor that as much as possible to the point that when they start trying to sell their product to you, you're in such a conditioned state of saying yes, 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 raising your hand and doing whatever the speaker says, that when he does get to his sale and tries to sell you his product or his course or whatever it may be, you're already a little bit brainwashed into just standing up and going to the back of the room to go and get your course or go buy the product. So that's an example of consistency. The best example I can give you is when working with an estate agent. Now, the first question that I ask an estate agent is, how long have you been in the property game? And depending what their answer is, I'll always ask the question. I'll say, sure, 5 years, you've obviously been negotiated down a lot, because every property is negotiable, isn't it? And I get them to say yes to that first question because what I've done now is I've anchored that it's okay for me to negotiate with them. So you just want to get them to say yes to some sort of rule of yours. So is a negotiation always part of the game? That's one of my favorite questions to ask an estate agent. They invariably say yes. And then when I do come with a low offer and they say, wow, that's a low offer, I'll just refer back to the time that they say yes to the fact that negotiation is always part of the game. So that's just a clever way in which you can anchor that negotiation is going to happen, it's going to come, and that the estate agent shouldn't be scared or shouldn't be overwhelmed. So essentially, guys, that's my persuasion techniques for you today. Essentially, you want to start with some scarcity to make sure that the perceived value of the product goes up. Using authority is a great way in which you can demand respect and influence. Liking, make sure that you're building rapport with each person that you're working with, because people tend to want to do business with those who they like and they engage with. You want to make sure that you're also using this consistency play to ensure that your rules get followed as opposed to somebody else's rule. Look at the reciprocity, so make sure that you're giving first before you're receiving. And using these techniques ethically is very important for me. So using personality frameworks and understanding different types of people and different types of persuasion techniques must be used ethically to push your business, but as well as the people you're working with business forward. Because I'm a big and firm believer of karma. So if you're going out there and using these techniques to seduce or persuade or to get as much as you can and squeeze people as much as you can, just know that that kind of energy you're putting out into the world will come back to you tenfold. I know I spoke really quickly. I just wanted to make sure to get you guys out by 7 o'clock. You are obviously more than welcome to go and review this video and go and look at the frameworks that I've spoken about, and obviously condition yourself to become used to these new concepts. For now, I'm just going to open the floor for some questions, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay, so that I can review the questions. Let's have a quick look. Okay. So first question is from Kagiso. His question is, does a bad credit report affect a first-time investor? So Kagiso, that will definitely depend on how you plan on raising the finance for your first deal. If you're going for a private investor, the private investor will probably not ask you for your credit score. Though if you do go for traditional institutional lending like a bank, the bank will definitely pull your credit score. And if your credit report is poor, that will definitely work against you when applying for a loan. So no, it won't affect you with a private investor, but there's a very good chance that a traditional bank will do so. Okay, let's see if there are any other questions. Okay, I'll give you guys another chance. Here's Neo. When do you start with negotiating the property price down? I think that's a great question, Neo, because a lot of the times where I see a lot of first-time investors getting stuck is that they spend too much time on the first deal. They spend too much time on every deal. Some of my students will spend 2-3 weeks analyzing one deal to the nth degree, and then I'm thinking to myself, but you haven't even pitched the offer. So you're spending all your time on this one deal, but you don't even know if there's any motivation in the deal. So the way I like to do it is before I arrange a viewing or do any kind of detailed analysis, I'll send the estate agent an email that says, "Hi, my name is Lawrence. I'm a cash investor. Would the owner be willing to accept a 20% discount on this deal, yes or no?" If the estate agent doesn't come back to me, it means there's no motivation in the deal. I won't spend any time really doing any detailed analysis, because if there's no motivation, there's no discount. If there's no discount, there's no deal. So my preference is that as soon as you find a deal that makes high level financial sense, put an offer forward to the estate agent to determine their level of motivation. If they're motivated and they come back to you and say, yes, I'd accept maybe a 20% discount, then do your detailed analysis, arrange a viewing, and then sign the offer to purchase. Okay, Sally Ann, how long do you negotiate? When do you walk away? That's a really good question, Sally Ann. And I think there's different schools of thought here. Some people, they start with an offer. Let's say that the property is worth $1 million and your max offer is 700,000. Some people like to start at 500,000 and then give themselves some room to work up to 700,000. My preference is I go in with my highest offer. So if 700,000 is where it makes financial sense for me, I put the offer in. And then I say to the estate agent, this is a non-negotiable. I don't want to waste your time. This is my highest offer. If it's not accepted, let's move our different ways. I'd rather put 10 or 15 of those offers out a month than to go in at 500,000 and try and leave some room for negotiation. But I guess that's a different approach for different people. So Bouchle is asking, where can I review the videos? So we are going to be putting it on the Sapin member page. Dave, maybe you can just put a link to that on the chat. Otherwise, it's also going to be on the My Property app page under the tutorial videos. I've just put a link of that in the chat, so you can go and check that out. Okay, Mono is asking, I'm struggling to find decent properties that are well priced and in a good area. What tips do you have, and where's the best to find properties? So yeah, that's a key question, Mono. That's obviously where a lot of the value lies. To find decent properties that are well priced in a good area, I don't think that's really possible. You can find rundown properties that are well priced in a good area, or you can find decent properties in a lower end area. I think the key concept here to note is that depending on your strategy is going to determine which area you want to focus on. So if you want to focus on cash flow, on rental deals, avoid the good areas. Avoid Bryanston, Sandton, Greenpoint, Umhlanga. Avoid the upper market areas, because I can tell you now there are no good cash flow or rental deals in those areas. If you want rental cash flow, you need to look at low to middle income areas, things like Rosettenville, Joburg South, Joburg CBD. You want to maybe be looking at Woodstock, at student accommodation areas. That's where you're going to find the cash flow. If you're looking at flipping can technically work anywhere, but I think it works best in the middle to high income areas. All you need to do is find a distressed enough property or distressed enough seller, get it at a low price, and thus you can flip it. Mona, I would recommend that you go and check our other videos. We've got a video on strategy area property on how to find distressed deals. So go check that webinar out, and you'll get a lot of the tips that you need there. Evan's asking, where can I download the My Property app? So currently it is a web app. So we've just put the link to the web app there. By the end of the year, we will have something for you on an app basis. Okay, let's see. Jeff asking, how do you play around in negotiating a deceased estate? Sure. So Jeff, that's a very good question. I think the challenge that I'm seeing with deceased estates is that, and depending on the structure that the person bought it in, is in order for that property to transfer into the person's name who's inheriting it, they have to pay inheritance tax, which could be usually the value of a third of the property value. So the property is worth R1 million before the person who's inheriting the property can actually get that property and sell it or utilize it. They have to pay 300,000 Rand estate duties or inheritance tax. So oftentimes the people who have just inherited this property are looking to sell it off because they're quite distressed. They usually don't have the 300,000 rand to pay in order to get the property into their name. So being able to negotiate with them, it should actually be relatively easy because they are motivated. So the steps you need to take is obviously run the numbers, ensure you understand what your lowest and what your highest offer is. Start with your lowest offer, move your way up until the highest offer. It really comes down to what the person who's inheriting the property is willing to settle for. So it pretty much follows the same process and the same kind of approach that you would take with a normal negotiation. Cool. I'm just scrolling through here to see if there are any other final questions. Um, cool. I don't see any other questions. Fantastic. But guys, thank you very much for joining our quick webinar again. Maybe just before we go over to ending the session, would you guys mind just posting some comments as to what you'd like to see at the next webinar? So are there any questions or things that you're struggling with that we can help you out with so that we know what your next webinar should be? I see here a question from Heron. How do you negotiate a back-to-back deal? What if I don't get the buyer? So for those of you who don't know what a back-to-back deal is, essentially the property doesn't transfer into your name. So you're basically the middleman between a distressed seller and a hungry buyer. So you don't actually have to buy the property, but rather you just play the middleman between the two. So Heron, this really comes down to contract law. So you've got to have a really solid contract with the distressed seller. In that contract, you can say that your offer is subject to various terms. One of the terms might be that you need 30 days to find an investor or find a new buyer, and if that 30-day lapses, the contract is null and void. So essentially what you're saying there is you're giving yourself a month to find an investor, and if you don't find an investor in that month period, the contract is obviously cancelled. So that's a way in which you can negotiate some time in the suspensive clauses of your OTP. Of course, the seller's not going to be very excited about that, and they probably won't accept that contract. It depends how distressed they are. The other alternative is that you buy the property hoping to back to back it before the transfer actually happens, which means your risk is that after 3 months, if you haven't found another buyer, then the property will transfer into your name and you'll have to try and sell it in your name, which is obviously a bit of a risk. So this will come down to how well you can negotiate a contract with the seller and with the distressed seller and with the new buyer. Tamaran asked, when would it be okay to approach an owner directly? So that's a good question. I think, oftentimes people try and go to the owner directly, especially at auction, because you can get all the information of the auction online. You can get the address. You can then pull a limestone report to get the owner's details, and you can contact them directly. What I have found, especially from some of my students, is that phoning an owner that is about to go to auction directly is a very it can be quite dangerous. Well, not dangerous, but the owner is in a very bad headspace, very emotional, going through turmoil, and then an investor phones them and says, "Hey, I want to buy your property and I want to get a good discount." It usually rubs the investor off, well, not the investor, the distressed seller off in the wrong way, and they are very unlikely to want to negotiate with you. So, approaching an owner directly, I guess it depends on the situation. Where I have seen it work is when you've got a very distressed house. So not a house that's going to auction, but a house that's obviously been abandoned or is dilapidated or has got some, illegal tenants living in there, to try and get that owner's contact details, because that owner clearly has a property that's not an asset for them, but more a liability. They tend to be more open to negotiations than someone who's just about to go to auction. So my advice there is to walk the streets, find a highly distressed property, one that's run down, dilapidated, that obviously isn't being lived in. Pull a limestone report to get that person's contact details, and then say to them that you'd like to buy the property, renovate it, and potentially move in there because you really like living there or whatever. Spin a story. Don't tell them that you want to make money off them. and then potentially they might be open to that discussion. Okay, let's see. Nicole, how do you go about setting up a rent to rent? Now, that could be potentially a good webinar that David could run. Um, so, Dave, if you are open to that, I think maybe a session on how to do a back-to-back and a rent-to-rent strategy. For the people on the call that don't necessarily have a lot of capital to get started with, could be a great way to share some value. Tandeka, if you're a sourcing agent, do you still have to go after distressed properties? Yes, Tandeka. So the only time you make money in property is through either distressed property or distressed seller. A distressed property is one that's in physically bad condition. A distressed seller is someone who's motivated because of a personal situation. They're getting divorced or they've been retrenched. But yes, as a sourcing agent, if you're finding deals for investors, you have to be finding distressed leads always. Butler, is there a website where deceased estate agents are listed? How to negotiate with an owner whose property is about to go to an auction? Sure. So negotiating with an owner whose property is about to go to auction is very difficult because they are highly emotional. Um, Regarding the deceased estates, I don't know, Dave, if you know where deceased estates are listed. I do know My Roof, so www.myroof.co.za. I don't know if it's repossessed or deceased estates that are there. Otherwise, Dave, if you do have any suggestions as to where we can find deceased estates properties being listed, probably the better opportunity would be to go and speak to not a divorce attorney, but to go and speak to an attorney or a law firm and ask them what deceased estate deals they have on the table. That could potentially be an interesting one. Okay, Sipo. Lawrence, have you done a webinar on the different ways to finance a property deal? Yeah, we did that, I think, last month. Different ways in which you can finance and creatively finance a deal. So again, go check out our previously ones. So R to R, that's rent to rent. So essentially, you don't own the property. You just you rent from one person, then you sublet to a bunch of other people. I think they will do another one on that. Heron's asking to talk about what could go wrong or what to look out for. I agree. That's a great one. Potentially, looking at what the do's and don'ts are of property investing. We can definitely do something like that. Okay, when can you start applying for finance under a new registered company with one property also financed? So, Moharamede, you can definitely, start with financing in a newly registered company, but the bank is going to ask you to take personal surety. So if your company hasn't been trading for 3 years successfully, then they're going to say, we'll loan the money to the company, but you as the individual have to take personal surety of that deal, of that property. So if for some reason the business can't fund or pay the bond repayments, they're going to come after you to make sure that you as the individual can pay for it. So as long as you're willing to take that risk. Sherman, how would you negotiate or persuade a problem tenant that has never missed a single payment to you mutually part ways with? Asking for a friend. How would you negotiate a problem tenant that has never missed a single payment? So when you mean problem tenants, if they're not missing payments, what do you mean? How are they a problem tenant? Are they, causing a lot of noise, or are they irritating other tenants? Because if they never missed a payment, then I wouldn't call them a problem tenant. So maybe you just want to unpack that a little bit more. Yes, we are recording this at the moment. It will be live on the My Property app tutorial page. Alternatively, it'll also be on the members portal of Sapin. Members portal of Sapin. So Dave, can you add the My Property app link to the top of the chat bar as well, so that those who are using that platform can also check the recordings. And then Sherwin, if you just want to give me a little bit more detail on your question, I can answer it. Otherwise, I think that's it. If I have missed your question, please just pop it in again so that I can double check it. Awesome. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on another successful webinar. And yeah, we look forward to the next one. Sherwin has just added to his question, breaking complex rules and overcrowding, causing the complex manager to reach out to you. Sure. I mean, Sherwin, I think it comes down to what that person wants. Why are they breaking the rules? So I would start by first understanding, going to every negotiation with curiosity. Maybe he's breaking the complex rules because he doesn't think that the rules are important, or maybe he doesn't know that the rules exist. So I think the best policy is always to have a conversation with the person, understand what it is that they want or what they're struggling with, and try and helping them with their needs. Another great way to deal with a problem tenant, especially one that's not paying rent, like for example, let's say that you're buying a property at auction and there are tenants living illegally in that property. The best way to get those people out of the property is not to evict them, but rather to go up to them and say, listen, can I pay for a moving company to come and move your stuff out, and then I'll pay 1 or 2 months rent at your next place. What you're basically doing is you're taking the money that you were going to invest in evicting the person and using that money to persuade them or move them out of the property in a nice, easy way. That's not to say that they always move, but there's a better chance because you're trying to help them out as opposed to just pushing them out. Awesome. Butler, can I do these deals when I don't have a company on my name? No, you can do it in your personal name. You don't need a company for that. Ayanda, is it advisable to include a deposit when purchasing? It all depends on the numbers, right? Sometimes it makes more sense to do a cash deal. Sometimes it makes more sense to leverage money from the bank. Always look at the numbers, and that's why we've created myapp.property. So go and get yourself registered on that. It's a free tool that will enable you to run deals with more confidence, and you'll be able to analyze exactly what your return on investment would be on a deal. So awesome, guys. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Until then, happy investing.
Hi, my name is Lebo Kumunuza. I'm the chairman of the South African Property Investors Network, but I'm also a dragon from Dragon's Den. We invite you this year to join us at the SA Property Investors Awards. And we're very excited because this year we're taking our gala dinner one step up. The reason